Now, as far as the congregation that I'm currently addressing, which is the internet, I want you to turn with me to the book of Genesis, chapter 25 through 33. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to start off with these particular twins because, of course, chapter 25 through 33 is a lot. That's why Pastor Dreamz is here to help you understand the word.
Shepherd.
Now, I'm going to help them understand the word, as Jacob and Esau were twin sons of Isaac and Rebekah. Esau, the elder hunter, sold birthright to Jacob for stew. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, for stew.
You guys.
And then, of course, with Rebekah's help, Jacob deceived blind Isaac to steal Esau's blessing.
I know that ain't who I think it is.
Esau threatened murder, but then Jacob fled. After 20 plus years, they reconciled peacefully.
You guys.
Jacob became Israel, father of 12 tribes, and Esau's line, Edomites. I don't know what that means, but guess what? That has been your lesson today from Pastor Dreamz. You know what I'm saying? Go on, clap it up.
Give him some praise.
You know what I'm saying? Go on, give me some praise.
Give him some praise.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Drewski. I appreciate it. So anyways, all jokes aside, even though that wasn't a joke, that was actually the whole message of Genesis 25 through 33. And you're probably wondering to yourself, why in the world did you give us that random sermon? Well, I'm glad you asked. As these two particular Latin musicians that we've covered to the moon and back. If I was to look at my Peso Pluma coverage, it started June 2nd, 2023. If I was to look at Tito Double P, my coverage of him started off August 30th, 2024. It's safe to say there was a particular project that took over a year to make. More specifically, the project formally began December 10th, 2024, and ladies and gentlemen, it came out December 25th, 2025, which is titled Dinastía, which is Peso Pluma and Tito Double P's first collab album. But then that's not it, ladies and gentlemen. When it comes to this album, safe to say it's having a Notorious Mass Effect to the upteenth degree, to where I have to point out multiple tracks off of this album is charting in Mexico. And you're probably wondering, how many? 1, 2, 5, 7? I'm glad you asked. Ladies and gentlemen, Dinastía by Peso Pluma and Tito Double P currently has 14 tracks. Yes, 14 tracks charting in the top 50 in Mexico. And then, of course, that's not it. As usually, when it comes to these Latin musicians and my breakdowns and deep dives into these specific trajectories of these artists' career, which I appreciate y'all for supporting and things of that nature. You know, your boys on the charts, nothing too crazy. Only thanks to y'all support. So shout out to y'all. Basically, a lot of these Latin musicians I cover, even though they have a lot of tracks percolating in the top 50 of Mexico, rarely do you see them in the global standings as far as the top 100, unless it's like a Bad Bunny, Karol G, etc. Right? Tito Double P and Peso Pluma, I am pleased to announce that they have not one, but 2 tracks in the top 90. As the most popular track, objectively speaking, from their album that they just put out, is titled Dopamina. Dopamina? I think I'm saying it right. Yeah, so Dopamina is the most successful track from their collab album, and it's currently the 78th most played track in the world. And then, of course, there's another track titled Dano that's currently the 88th most played track in the world, and that is globally, of course. So shout out to Tito Double P and Peso Pluma for making a Notorious Mass Effect. And of course, to do a callback to why I even started off the segment with Jacob and Esau, is because what you're seeing on the cover right now, as far as the reflection of the relationship from Tito Double P and Peso Pluma, safe to say there was some liberties taken as far as, them using this image. But they was basically trying to say there was family ties. That's literally the only correlation. Peso Pluma didn't try to kill Tito Double P or vice versa. It's just for cultural reference. So Peso Pluma, just to let you know, and Tito Double P are second cousins, and they first met in person in Culiacán, Sinaloa. Yeah, Sinaloa. Sinaloa. Yeah, I know I was pronouncing that wrong. Sinaloa. When Peso Pluma was 18 and Tito Double P was 20. And essentially, their relationship grew to the point where Peso Pluma's music career started to take off, but Tito Double P was always there, and he initially wrote music as a hobby, but then ultimately started to become Peso Pluma's exclusive composer, writing many of Peso's breakout records. So it's only right that they have a whole collab album almost 5 years into Peso Pluma's successful musical career. As if you look at them individually, it's not like one is helping out the other while they're failing as a musician. Both of these artists, respectively speaking, is doing phenomenal on the charts. As far as the Billboard year-end top Latin artists in 2025, Tito Double P was number 4, and then guess who was number 5? Peso Pluma. Both of these artists are widely considered the leaders of the new Mexican music movement. And the reason why I say that is because not only are these highly acclaimed artists bonded by blood, but they also are out here impacting and affecting the masses in a way that cousins usually can only dream of, right? So they're living a dream, and now, for the first time ever, they have a whole collab album together. And with this album, there's a lot of subject matters, and that's another thing I wanted to dive into before we dive into 2 other tracks as far as Dano and Dopamino. The last thing I was want to get into as far as the overview of this album is the subject matter. So if you don't know, going back to 2023 through 2025, Mexico had a very interesting stance. And what was that stance, you may ask? Well, I'm glad that you posed that question, as Mexico tightened narcocorridos bans in states like Chihuahua, and no, not the dog, I think it's Baja or Baja, California, Nayarit, Macocan, I think that's how you say it. And what in the world? Okay, I think I can pronounce this. Aguascalientes. 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 Hopefully I said that right. If I didn't, I promise I try my best. So anyways, Mexico tightened the narcocorridos in these specific places due to the glorifying of drug violence / crime rising because of the cartel influence and youth exposure. Some cities banned public performances, and places like Sheinbaum opposes outright bans, favors education / peace promotion over censorship. Now, I'm not going to say which side of the argument I fall on, but all I'm saying is maybe Atlanta was on to something.
Whoop-de-doo.
I said maybe Atlanta was on to something.
Whoop-de-doo. And we beat these folk. Whoop-de-doo. We beat them. We go forward.
Now, I'm not saying snitching is applicable in this situation. All I'm saying is I think Mexico did the Lord's work, because, sometimes these little Timmies out here are influenced and they end up crashing out. That's why I'm going to leave it at. So when it comes, that was basically the callback, especially when you come into the continuation of the album, because to bring it back, basically the subject matter had to be restructured, right? And that's because of Mexico's tightened prohibitions on narcocorridos. So a lot of the lyrics was restructured, and now artists outside of Peso Pluma and Tito Double P are deliberately pivoting away from explicit crime glorification, drug-centric narratives, basically something that all hell will break loose if it happened in the U.S. I kid you not, boy. If there was a bunch of young thugs
Whoop-de-doo.
acting like Mexico, man, drill rappers will lose their mind. And I'm not mad at it.
But then, you know what I'm saying? I was like, damn, look at the state of hip hop. Like, what's going on?
So I think that's a W for Mexico but you know, at the end of the day, I do think you need freedom of speech, and that definitely goes against it. The main thing is, if they're actually doing these criminal activities, catching them in a very, you know, escalated or expedited way, right? Make it quick to catch them if they're doing a crime, right? But I do think there should be freedom of expression, but also there should be consequences for people who, you know, break the law. So hopefully that makes sense. You know, I don't never want to advocate for taking away freedom of speech. So anyways, back to Peso Pluma and Tito Double P. So that's basically why the album got reworked. And when it eventually came out over a year later, they basically surprised the masses, as I don't think any bubbling or any type of tidbit surfaced from this, especially in my radar. And, you know, I've been covering Latin music like a kilo of Miley Cyrus, you know what I'm saying? So as far as this Latin music coverage, I did not know Peso Pluma and Tito Double P was going to come out with a whole collab album. But one thing I did say throughout my entire coverage of Corridos Tumbados is basically how these Latin musicians are sticking together in ways that I just wish my preferred genre would stick together as far as hip hop, collabing with one another instead of tearing each other down. Because now, as you can tell, with the massive success of Dinastía, it is currently one of the most played albums in the world, objectively speaking, as that album is currently the 10th most played album in the world, and they already have 2 tracks in the top 90, and we're talking about globally. And Mexico is going insane, 14 tracks in the top 50 for Mexico. So shout out to Tito Double P, shout out to Peso Pluma. Obviously, you already know this was put out under Double P Records, which, if you don't know, is an independent record label ran by Peso Pluma, founded by Peso Pluma back on April 2023. And essentially, it focused on a lot of Latin musicians like Jasiel Núñez, who we've covered, Esteban Plazola, Tito Double P, of course. And with the release of this collab album under Double P Records, along with your cousin, it just has to be a tremendous feeling to be on top with the person that you can call family. So that being said, we are going to stay on Tito Double P and Peso Pluma, and we're going to dive deep into the next track that I was wanting to talk about, which is the most popular track off of the album, titled Dopamina. Now, when getting back into the album Dinastía, you know we have to start off with the most popular track off of the album, objectively speaking, because as of right now, via Billboard, Dopamina is the 78th most played track in the world. But then, of course, when you look at Mexico, it is the number 1 most played track in the world. So safe to say it's a phenomenal accomplishment. I believe putting out this type of successful album with your cousin has to feel phenomenal, especially being able to bring family along with you for the ride as far as success. Because it's not like either of these artists was struggling before they had a collab album. As far as the Billboard year-end top Latin artists in just last year in 2025, Tito Double P was number 4, Peso Pluma was number 5. So even though they're family, even though they're cousins, in their own respective careers, they are putting up some monumental numbers. So as far as this collab album, their first ever, basically Dopamina is the outright most successful track from the album. Now, a close second is Dano, which is the 88th most played track overall, but it's the 2nd most played track in Mexico. So now, when you look at it specifically, you wonder what Dopamina is about. And of course, based off of the title, which I believe is just dopamine, I think a lot of Spanish words are just playing off of English words and like vice versa. I'm not saying like, you know what I'm saying? I don't want to get in trouble. You know what I mean? I'm just trying to let y'all know that if you look at Dopamina, it's usually closer to like a dopamine type word in English. So anyways, I believe it's dopamine. So with that being said, the lyrics is, of course, talking about luxury, lifestyle, women. And the main thing with the delivery I noticed was the contrast between Peso Pluma and Tito Double P. I love how these two artists, even though they grew up with each other, right? These are cousins, second cousins that grew up together since Peso was 18 and Tito Double P was 20. So they grew up together and still stylistically, they're vastly different. And it is phenomenal over the same beat. As Dopamina is definitely one of my personal standouts. And of course, when listening to the album, you can definitely tell how these two artists individually blew up. But together, I love the dynamic they're having, especially over this entire body of work. As when you look at the overall themes, it's basically about unity over division, family before ego, corridos as a cultural heritage, not criminal propaganda. Because when it comes to Mexico, like I talked about earlier, as far as my overall coverage of the album, basically, Mexico tightened narcocorridos bans in 2023 and 2025 in states like Chihuahua, Baja, California, Nayarit, Michoacan, and Aguascalientes. Basically, all of that is to say that Mexico is not going for any of the glorification of drug and violence because of the rise of cartel influence and youth exposure. Let them tell it, right? Now, I made a joke talking about how U.S. needs to pick up those type of same sentiments, but I kind of want to, well, not kind of, I definitely want to walk that back, as you never want to advocate for freedom of expression being taken away. I just believe if you actually do criminal actions, then you should face the consequences, but you should have the freedom of expression, especially musically. So anyways, another thing I pointed out was basically the overall cover of the album. If you don't know, it's basically showcasing Jacob and Esau from the book of Genesis, chapters 25 through 33. And these are twin sons of Isaac and Rebekah. I've already went over that whole story, but the main thing you need to know is just that. It's twin sons. And of course, even though Peso Pluma wasn't trying to kill Tito Double P or vice versa, they're playing off of how they're bonded by blood as far as them being family. So overall, I do like how the album is taking a interesting subject matter because of them having to rework it due to Mexico tightening down on what artists could have in their music. And when it comes to me not knowing the lyrics, for me, sonically, I could tell Peso Pluma has such a complementary style to Tito Double P just because of the vastly different ways that they deliver verses. So with that being said, that's the main thing I wanted to get into. And of course, we already got into Dopamina, which we just did as far as the most successful track off of the album. Now, I would like to get into the second most popular track off of the album, which is Dano. Finishing off our coverage of Dinastía, which is the first collab album between Peso Pluma and Tito Double P, which is currently 15 tracks and 44 minutes in length. But essentially speaking, after getting into the overview, after getting into the most popular track from the album, which was Dopamina, now I want to get into the second most popular track from the album that's titled Dano. That when you look at it as far as the subject matter, because of course, if I don't know what they're saying, I'm going to look it up. So it focuses on toxic love and emotional pain, with a lot of the overall reflections being about a woman and the emotional pain from toxic love. Basically, that's what it's about. And the main thing I was wanting to get at is when you look at Dopamina, when you look at Dano being the most successful from a global standpoint, but then you look at them having 14 tracks charting in the top 50 in Mexico, when, it's funny, they had 15 tracks. I wonder what track was left off, because it seems like every single track was on here except for one. And they probably look at that one track that wasn't on the charts like, dang, they must have hated that track. I actually don't know which one it is. I see every single one on here. Maybe it's Toucan. No, I see Toucan right there. I don't know. I have to look at it later. But literally it says 14. And there's 15 tracks on this album. So I wonder which one from the album was left off. Anyways, I guess I didn't go over the actual charting of the album. So in Mexico specifically. So overall, Dano and Dopamina as the most successful tracks from the album. Currently, as a global accomplishment, Dinastía is currently the 10th most played album in the world. When you look at Mexico specifically, you have Dopamina, that's the first most played track in the world. Dano, that's the second. Backpack Boys, which is the fourth most played track in Mexico. Ni Pedo, which is the fifth. 7-3, which is the sixth most played track in Mexico. Puti Legante. Hopefully, if these cuss words in Spanish, guess what? I was ignorant. I didn't know what they were saying. So, anyways, that Puti Legante, that's his 12th most played track in Mexico. The intro is, interestingly enough, the 14th most played track in Mexico. Belete or Belit is the 22nd. Malibu is the 27th. Tucon L is the 32nd. Trucha, I think it's Trucha, is the 33rd. Mezcal is the 44th. And 20s is the 48th. And Moraz 2 or Moraz 2nd is the 49th. So shout out to Tito and Double P, not only being family and bonded by the blood, but they also are bonded in the success in the music industry with the whopping 14 tracks charting in Mexico. So as far as my coverage of Tito Double P and Peso Pluma, not only am I wanting to highlight the family ties, because of course I've been covering Tito Double P since August 30th, 2024. I've covered Peso Pluma since June 2nd, 2023. So I've been very captivated by these artists, especially diving deep into their marketing strategies and how they're out here notoriously affecting the masses with their music. But as a family member, having an individual successful career and then coming together for this album is one of the greatest things you could see, especially when you could have easily switched up on the other person or vice versa. And I love to see how the longevity, not only with the relationship, as if you don't know, Peso Pluma was 18 and Tito Double P was 20 when they first met. Once again, they were second cousins. And so now, in the year of 2026, they're still going strong and notoriously affected the masses. And this is probably one of the more powerful examples of how corridos tumbados can affect the masses. And then, of course, them countering the overall limitations of the Mexico government, basically coming out and tightening on narcocorridos, which basically means that they don't want certain public performances glorifying drug violence because of rising cartel influence and youth exposure, which is a big deal. That's why I keep repeating it throughout my Tito Double P and Peso Pluma coverage. Imagine you as an artist, wherever you're from, and your government say you can't do a specific subject matter, and now you got to change the whole album, as they basically reworked all type of subject matters in the album. Even the production at some point was restructured. Multiple songs were rewritten, and of course, artists outside of Tito Double P and Peso Pluma in the Latin community, they basically pivoted away from explicit crime glorification and drug-centric narratives. So mostly people talk about street life without criminal praise. They talk about loss, boasting, heartbreak, romance, and emotional vulnerability because of course the government said no more of that gang and drug talk. So I did want to end off with the awards that both of these gentlemen have racked up before they made an album together. As Peso Pluma won Best Musica Album for Genesis back in 2024. He has 6 wins at the 2023 Billboard Latin Music Awards for New Artist, Hot Latin Songs Artist, and then of course the BMI Champion Award in 2025 and multiple Latin Grammy nominations, and he won Best MTV EMA Best Latin in 2024. And then when it comes to Tito Double P, he was the BMI Impact Award for 2025. And of course, he was nominated in a lot of different award shows, more specifically 2025 Billboard Latin Music Awards. He had 10 categories. And he was also the AMA/iHeart nominee for favorite male/best new artist just last year in 2025. So this collab album couldn't have came at such a more of a perfect time. And I'm glad to see Tito and Double P showcasing what a Notorious Mass Effect is when it comes to corridos tumbados. So with that being said, click my link tree in my bio. Let me know on one of my social medias. Have you listened to Peso Pluma and Tito Double P's album titled Dinastía? And at the end of the day, do you believe that Tito Double P and Peso Pluma started off 2026, even though did this technically come out? And yeah, it technically came out 2025 at the very end, December 25th. But do you believe continuing into 2026, Peso Pluma and Tito Double P started off 2026 in the best way possible for corridos tumbados?